games. All right, so welcome to our November 15th class. We're going to be discussing levels and environments. Again, if you've got any questions in the chat, let me know. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. Any questions here on the call, just feel free to raise your hand. Or for Michelle, use the raise hand button. Okay, great. So Muteep, I can't tell if you're just testing, raising your own hand there, or if you legitimately had a question.
I'm just giving a thumbs up.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to be discussing levels and environments. As a designer, one of the best entry-level positions for design is level design. So I want to give you a good overview of how level design works across several genres. So what we'll be discussing, we're going to go over the fundamental goals of level design across several genres, as I just said, and also how environment design can be used to set the emotion of the level. A lot of designers confuse level design and environment design. We're talking to some designers like, man, I can't wait to get into level design. I'm going to make like a spooky wizard's back alley area. And I'm like, that's actually environment design. That's an artistic discipline. As a level designer, though, you do have to be aware of the importance of environment design. So, get into this, the brass tacks of this. Level design is the physical layout of gameplay elements. Just about, I'd say, a good 95% of games out there have some kind of spatial element to them. They will require level design. Even a dating simulator can have an element of level design to it within the spatial layout of locations within that environment of the dating simulator is its level design. Most level design that we think of is what we see in the picture here. Generally a 3D map or a 2D map that dictates how players will move around and where these different gameplay elements are spatially located. That's your enemies, your pickups, your doors, different gameplay tools. So it's a physical layout of the gameplay elements. And also I'd say how the player avatar moves about that physical layout is an element of it as well. Player movement factors into your level design. You design levels differently for an RTS than you do for a FPS, a real-time strategy and first-person shooter. Environment design, that's the emotional tone and setting of a level. It's how it feels, it's its style. You can take the same level design and give it several different environment design approaches to get very different experiences. Going back to this one, this level design is almost entirely devoid of environment design. Unless you're going for something aggressively minimalistic and emotionally inert, I guess this would be your environment design, but I'd say that's not the most compelling environment design. Especially because all your gameplay elements here are almost the exact same color as your walls, which would be a problem. Environment design, you're not really worried so much about how things are laid out. You're mostly just worried about the feeling of it overall. All right, but before we dive into all this stuff, I want to talk about player perspective, because that is going to dictate a lot of what you do as a level designer. So you got to ask yourself, what's the player thinking about? As a player, I'm going into the game. I want to be accomplishing something. I'm thinking about a problem. The level design is one of the primary ways I will think about solving this problem. It's kind of the medium I'm moving through with my player avatar to address the problem I want to solve. I need to move hay from my field over to a barn. I need to attack this encampment. I have to find my way through a maze. As the level designer, I have to be thinking, what is the player trying to do? What are they trying to solve before I can know how to approach that level design? I will approach the level design of solving the maze differently than I will attacking the enemy encampment. So what's the player actually trying to do? Must know this before he can effectively design levels. So generally what they're thinking about is what I refer to as their gameplay vocabulary. I'm going into a game, picked up my controller, I'm thinking about doing something. I'm generally thinking about it along these three vectors. First is player movement, the player's position relative to gameplay components, my movement through the environment. Second is a viewpoint. Information the players have available to them. So as a level designer, I have to be aware of how is the player able to get gameplay information from the environment. So this can be, usually this is through your gameplay camera. There are also different options in different game genres. I perhaps can have a statistics window, or I can have different view filters and all this kind of stuff. The level design has to be compatible with how the player is viewing the gameplay world. I will approach a design differently if it's a first-person shooter, where I'm looking at through a first-person camera, versus if it's a top-down strategy game. And then also you gotta be thinking about the gameplay tools. So how will the level design incorporate the different gameplay elements that are in the environment? That's your enemies, your doors, your exploding barrels, item pickups, all that kind of stuff. One-way, like conveyor belts, those kind of things. Pits. All right, so going into movement. So that's pretty much how players will be negotiating spatial elements within the game. So obstacles, pathways, line of sight, that sort of stuff. It's either through the player avatar or via the gameplay environment, such as a puzzle. So this is an example here from Fall Guys, which is a game that's pretty much entirely about the overall player's movement through a specifically designed level. So in the level design for Fall Guys, I'm very much thinking about how does the player move through this environment and how do I make that interesting, provide really compelling challenges and really clear objectives for the player. So the player movement absolutely dictates how you approach the level design. If you change how the character moves in Fall Guys, you will need to do a massive refresh of the levels to help accommodate that. Next one is viewpoint. So how does a player gain information about the game world? Level design has to accommodate this. So, for example, here we've got, this is Legend of Zelda. I am blanking on the name of this one, though. My darn memory there. The Game Boy port. Someone in the chat, please let me know what the title of this Zelda game is. But because it views exclusively from a top-down perspective, within the level design, we've got to be able to embrace that perspective. The level design has to work within that top-down gameplay view regarding how it generally lays things out. So you want to have a lot of spatial information and environmental information towards the back of the environment, because that's how the gameplay, that's how the camera is angled. You don't want to have a lot of stuff in the front of the environment. So it's kind of, so all the levels are very flat at the front, and then they kind of escalate towards as we get deeper and deeper into the game world. Otherwise, if you did it the other way, then the player's view would constantly be getting blocked, and that would be very frustrating. So, last thing you want to be thinking about in level design is how does it work with the game, with the title's gameplay tools. So, how does the player interact with the environment? Levels must support the player expressing themselves through their gameplay tools. So, Link's Awakening, thank you very much. That was it. So this one here, Link's Awakening. All right, so anyways, we've got Animal Crossing here. I do remember that one. Animal Crossing, the level design is entirely about how the player's gonna be using their different gameplay tools. I'm using an axe to cut down the trees. I'm using a shovel here to aggressively attack this rock and get gold and gems out of it. Largely the overall layout and navigation. Oh, we lost Mutib. Anyways, the layout and navigation of the game isn't. Oh, just a second here. Boop. All right. Go. Okay. So layout and navigation isn't a huge part of the level design. It's mostly there for aesthetics. Largely, the level design here is focused very much on giving the player interesting things to do with their gameplay tools, because the gameplay of Animal Crossing is so focused on the player's gameplay tools. So, given all that, level design must support player objectives. So digging into this a little bit, so Here we got Stardew Valley. The player objectives here are very much about harvesting. It's about building stuff. It's about collecting resources from the environment. One of the things I think a lot of people overlook with Stardew Valley is because as a player, I really want to be focused on kind of the immediate environment around me, as I'm generally using tools that are effectively or only effective in my immediate area: watering cans, scythes, spreading out seeds, that kind of stuff. I really actually don't need to have a view that allows me to look off into the distance. It's kind of an interesting oversight I see a lot of games do, is they go, we're going to do like Stardew Valley, but with like a really cool third-person camera so you can look over your entire farm and all this stuff, and that looks really neat, except for the players aren't really interested in being able to see that. And so it emphasizes a type of gameplay that isn't actually forwarding the player's overall objective. So because the player's objective is very much about their immediate vicinity and managing and structuring the environment around them, you really have to design the levels and the overall layout to be directly supporting that. A question in the chat: are gameplay tools same as mechanics? Gameplay tools and mechanics are closely related, but slightly different from each other. So gameplay tools are things I, as a player, can use to interact with the environment. So all gameplay tools are mechanics. Not all mechanics are gameplay tools. For example, mechanic in Stardew Valley is the day-night cycle. That is not a direct gameplay tool that I have as a player. That is an external mechanic. So a gameplay tool as a player is like my ability to move, my ability to cut down wood, my ability to interact with animals, my ability to talk to people, my ability to plant grain, to water stuff. All those things are my overall gameplay tools. So Nadine, does that clarify your question? All right, let me know in the chat. All right, so regarding the player objective here is about directly collecting and harvesting goods from around them. You want to have a level design. You want to have, of course, a part of the gameplay design is that top-down camera view, and then you want to have level design that supports that camera view. Okay, so support, please. Marcos, you say other example about that support, please. Marcos, could you please clarify? I'm not entirely certain I understand your question there. Let me know what you'd like me to, what other example you'd like there. Okay, so here we've got Genshin Impact. Very different. In Genshin Impact, it's largely about me exploring an environment and going out and fighting monsters and going into dungeons. Because it's about me exploring an environment and moving my player from where I am to somewhere else in that environment, much more so than something like Stardew Valley. The third-person camera really supports that. Because we've got that third-person camera, we then need to have a level design approach that really embraces that overall view and those overall gameplay, I guess, the gameplay objectives of the player. So this is actually a really great thing they got with their open world design here, is that they've approached their level design to give you a lot of really clear objectives along the player's view horizon. So you can see there's various windmills and castle spires and jutting bluffs and mysterious mountains and caves. All these are the level designer letting the player know these are all places for you to interact with. These are things that are supporting your overall gameplay objective. We'll also see an example of a game that doesn't properly embrace that within an open world later on. But because as a player, I'm wanting to go out and explore this world, the level design is really supporting that, providing clear movement paths and clear objectives for the player. Or I guess clear level design goals that work with the player objective might be a clearer way of putting that. All right, so a genre that not everyone always thinks about as having level design, but a match 3. Match 3 absolutely has level design. It's more of puzzle design, but because where I would say those two things overlap is that because this is about moving things spatially around an environment, that does have a lot of overlaps with level design fundamentals. So you still have to look at a puzzle, lay it out, shape it, think about how the players, the spatial information that they have, the gameplay tools that they have, and the overall player objective here. So because the player objective here is very much about connecting 3 similar colored blocks, you want to have a view that matches that really well, and then the level design that works within that view. So this is very much about just clearly giving the player some interesting challenges regarding the overall linear movement of gameplay objects around the playfield here. So again, this is one of those genres where this does not benefit a lot from a third-person camera or a dynamic 3D view, that sort of stuff. This just really just needs to be clearly communicating the gameplay goals to the player. So another example, this is an open world FPS. This is for Halo Infinite. Here we've got, I think, a really interesting example of the player objective. One of my goals here is, of course, I'm Master Chief. I've got my gun. I want to be exploring the environment and shooting things. I've got a very clear gameplay tool here of a gun to be fighting things. But the general level layout here for this open world, it doesn't provide any clear targets for me to interact with. So the thing is that for the level design here in Candy Crush, I can clearly see things being laid out to let me know how I can move these different puzzle blocks. So I get those 3 in a row. Here in Genshin Impact, it's all about me moving around as a player and exploring the environment. I can see clear things for me to explore and to move my player avatar towards within the level design. Here in Halo Infinite, there's really not a lot of stuff for me to shoot at here. Like, I can't think of, I've got a gun, I want to find something to shoot, get into some kind of fight here. I see a lot of rocks and a lot of trees. If this was a game about mining or forestry, this would be a lot more interesting. And this is, I think, one of the, this could have been so much more exciting if you'd given some really clear enemy encampments or something like that. If the level design had better embraced the overall player objective. This is a good example of where those two things have been the player objective is not properly supported via the level design. Right. Moving on, so I want to cover an important idea here. So regarding any kind of level design that you're going to be doing, you want to be thinking about the concept of lock, then key. Again, this is an error that I see a lot of junior level designers making, and that is they will give the player the solution to a problem and then present the problem. It is, I pick up the key and then I see the key unlocks. The common thinking is that if you give the player a tool, they will then be thinking about what do we use this tool for. That actually isn't how players think about things. You want to present them a problem, and they're like, how do I solve this problem? That becomes a specific point of focus or pain point for the player. You then give them a tool to solve the problem. If I give the player, here in Doom, if I give the player the key to unlock this door and then present them the locked door, that has now just become a door. And it's, I see this problem a lot of times in, like, FPSs is a good example of this regarding weapons. It is, they will give you a rocket launcher and then they'll introduce you to the helicopter enemy that you have to use the rocket launcher on. Much more satisfying the other way around. If I was getting harassed by this helicopter enemy, I can't take it out, then I get the rocket launcher, I'm like, ah, great, this is exactly what I need to take down that pesky helicopter. Feels really satisfying. Mechanically, it's pretty much the same thing. We're just changing in the level design the order that we're presenting problems to the player. So always remember, present the player a problem, then give them the solution to that problem. Okay, so actually, we're going to go into environment design, but I just want to ask chat and everyone, does anyone have any questions regarding what we've discussed so far for level design? Going once, going twice. Anyone in chat? Okay, I'm going to, oh, yes, Michelle.
Hi. So the question I have is that, okay, overall in game design, there's often a thin line between like giving players enough information to explore and enjoy the game and giving too much or too little, which can make like a level feel either too easy or too frustrating. So how does one balance player guidance and exploration without making a level feel too linear?
That's an excellent question. So what you're asking there is you want to be able to give players problem to solve. You also don't want to be able to overly handhold them. What's that balance between making something too frustrating versus too handholdy, too streamlined, too much like you're spoon feeding them? That really the answer to that, if the best answer I found is just playtesting. It's, I've seen examples where people have overcorrected regarding making things too simple and too streamlined, or overcorrected on making things too difficult. There really isn't a magical formula to it. It varies from game to game. Something like Doom here, you're going to have much harder challenges than what you've got for something like Fall Guys or Stardew Valley. But yeah, actually, I agree with Nadine here. Excellent question there, Michelle. So I find the best way to do this is, I'd say first thing, don't trust your instincts as a designer on this. You are so familiar with your design and the layout, you will overcorrect it to where you currently are as a designer. It's just a natural blindness you get from working so closely with this thing. Remember, players will spend about, in this level here in Doom, they're going to spend about 45 minutes to an hour in this experience before they move on. You will have spent months, if not years, going through every single inch of this thing, making sure that 45 minutes to an hour is very streamlined. As a result, you're so familiar with it, you've lost all objectivity. Best thing I can say is playtest. Pull in people who have got as little exposure to this experience as possible. Sit them down, watch them play it, see what happens, get someone else's perspective on it, and say it's the best way of addressing that. And also get a sense for how difficult or how easy you want this experience to be. If I was watching someone play through this and they were dying 10 to 15 times in this level, I would be like, yep, that's about where we want the difficulty to be at. Great. Run a couple more play testers, see if that's kind of the overall kind of skill level that we're seeing. On the other hand, something like Fall Guys, if people aren't able to get all the way to the end of the level, I know that level now has some serious problems in it, because that's not part of the challenge we want. We want them getting through to the end of the level, but stumbling along the way. All right, Michelle, does that answer your question? Awesome.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right, no worries. Cool. Okay, we're going to move on. So we're going to jump into a little bit about environment design now. So regarding environment design, as I said earlier, is not level design. These are very different things. Environment design is about the look and feel. Level design is about the overall gameplay systems, interaction, and those three things I was mentioned earlier. So going a little bit into environment design. So environment design is generally how you artistically set the tone about how the player should feel. You can take very similar, the identical level designs, give them very different environment designs, and get a very different player experience. This is where we're emotionally setting the tone for the player about how they're supposed to approach this. So, for example, the environment design of Breath of the Wild here, it's open, it's grand, it's majestic, there's a sense of wonder and awe and a little bit of danger. You can see Death Mountain there in the background, it looks pretty spooky, but immediately near to the player's starting position, it's warm and soft and organic and very inviting. Comparing that to the open world environment design of something like Grand Theft Auto 5, it's seedy, it's dirty, it's grubby. There is a sense of exploration and a little bit of wonder there about the vastness of the city, but there's also a real, much more sense of intensity and danger and almost a somewhat underlying note of dysfunction than there is within this. This is warm and comforting and inviting. This is more dark, seedy, and perhaps, very fun, but not as relaxing and chill as this is. For example, also just going into the overall environment design of something like Candy Crush here, a match 3 game. It's got that very light, playful aesthetic. Almost the exact same mechanics of something like Puzzle Quest is this one. Puzzle Quest is an RPG match 3. It is, Puzzle Quest wants to be much more like a traditional kind of European style RPG. So it's very much worn. You get a sense of like old leather and dust and wood. The environments are, I guess, kind of the overall environment for the feeling here. It is, let me see how best I describe this. There's a lot more sharp edges to it. There's a lot more friction. There's a bigger sense of danger overall. You can almost feel, this almost feels like you're in an old tavern where, wanderers and adventurers would gather, as opposed to the fun, candy-colored dreamscape of Candy Crush Saga. This is much more playful and light and approachable. This has got an environment that's much more musty, dark, evocative. And again, like the exact same mechanics, or very, very similar mechanics at least. Environment design is more, question from Anxious. Environment design is more related to the narrative and the tone of the game. Yes, it is. So this is the thing. You can get a very different narrative and tone with very different environment designs, even though you got something that's mechanically very similar. For example, these two, though the mechanics between Grand Theft Auto and Zelda are further apart than the ones between Candy Crush and Puzzle Quest. But very much is like there is a version of the environment design for Grand Theft Auto that is more lush and open and inviting, and that would be at odds with the overall experience that the developers are going for within Grand Theft Auto. Anxious, does that answer your question? All right. That actually just about wraps up what we've got for today's class. So environment design sets emotion is very much kind of the focus there. All right. So does anyone have any final questions regarding what we went over today? Anyone? Okay, Michelle, yes, and Mati, but Michelle was first. Michelle, what's on your mind?
Also, I wanted to ask, are there any tools or techniques you'd recommend for us to maybe quickly use to prototype and also testing level outputs and also as well as level layouts and also environmental layouts before full development?
So overall, you're asking about prototyping for your level design and gameplay movement. So for that's very much going to depend on the game that you're making. So you can absolutely do this is a tough one. It very much depends on the style of game that you're making. You can do, some games work really well with a paper prototype. So just sit down, draw out a map, do a level layout. Like if I'm doing, a map for Link's Awakening, it's very easy for me to be like, okay, so like you can have an entrance here, and then we have a path, and there's another exit, and then here we'll have an enemy here and here, and then there's another exit here, and we have a bomb room here that then goes out. You can do this for a 2D game. You can do this pretty quickly. You can say, okay, well, I'm gonna move that enemy. I think that'll be better, over here in front of the bomb entrance to draw the player's attention. That's a good way of prototyping. That does not work as well with a 3D game like Halo Infinite or Doom, where you want to be able to take verticality into it as well, because 2D does not support verticality. So paper prototypes work really well for a specific 2D style of games. If you're doing something that's more 3D, where height is an important element of your level design, I would recommend using a tool that's as close to your actual gameplay as possible. So for example, if you're working with an Unreal Engine, just getting a basic version of your character moving around and doing a gray box level layout. Like as a level designer, your levels should work independent of the environment design. If you've prototyped out your level as a designer, you're trying it out and it doesn't feel good, getting some pretty art in there does not fix the problem. You've got to be able to make sure that it works as part of the prototype process. So I'd say, I guess to just provide a more specific answer to your question there, Michelle, the most effective prototype tool absolutely depends on the game that you're making. I would recommend going with the lowest cost and simplest version of a prototyping tool that best represents your overall gameplay. So I've worked on some projects where one of the best things we can do is just to sketch things out on a whiteboard or a piece of paper. Other projects, it works a lot better if we just take our existing level puzzle pieces and we just jump into our game engine, start moving them around, trying them out, because the player movement was so important and the player perspective was so important to this. We just couldn't capture it via paper prototyping. Michelle, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Okay, so let's see, a couple more questions. If most of the time your play only walks and jumps in lots of games, what makes it customizable to a game? Sorry, Nadine, let me just go over the question here again. If most of the time your player only walks and jumps in lots of games, what makes it customizable to a game? I think, oh, sorry, Mutib, that's right, you had a question. Nadine, I'll get to you in a minute. Sorry, Mutib. Yes, what was your question,
Okay, no
Mutib?
problem. Okay, so I was more concerned about the connection between level design and the environment design, because sometimes when you do a level design, there are so many elements in the environment design which can affect your gameplay or visuals of the gameplay. Let's say there are too many attractions in the environment, and it makes your level a little bit unclear to where to go and what to interact with. So how do you see that, and what is the usual flow of design? What comes first, level design or environment,
Oh,
and how do we connect those to have a perfect gameplay?
that's actually a really good question, Mutib. So you're wondering about do we do level design first or environment design first? And as a level designer, how do I handle it when environment design is pulling things in a bad direction, or it's undermining the overall gameplay? That's actually an important element of the environment designer's job, which is generally, again, going to be more of an artistic discipline. Art has to support gameplay. Players play games, they don't look at them. And I think, every art director I know will understand that. So if you find that, so first thing, you want to start with level design. You have to understand the overall problem that you're presenting to the player, why that's interesting, how they can be working through it. So you get a sense of what the player experience here, what they will be playing. Once you get that down, you're going to hand it over to the art team, where your environment design is going to take hold. if suddenly they've lit this in such a way that I can't, it's too dark for me to see that this is a bombable passage over here. I got to go back to the environment artist and look at, we need players to be able to see this. Otherwise, they're just going to be confused. And I wouldn't say I don't care if it doesn't look good, but it looking good cannot undermine gameplay. And I even see this problem in a lot of modern games where they've gone for something that looks really good, but I'm like, as a player, I'm so confused about what I'm supposed to focus on, what's going on here overall. There's actually, I think, a really interesting example of this is the new lighting model they have for, I think it was Doom, the Dark Ages that just came out. In my opinion, that new ray traced lighting makes it puts everything in shadow, and so as a result, all the enemies look exactly the same. The gameplay of Doom is entirely about target prioritization, or largely about target prioritization. If I can't tell what the different enemies are, I don't know how to prioritize my targets, and that just undermines that experience. So, to more directly answer your question, Muti, you do level design first, then environment design. There will be an ongoing dialogue with the art team about making sure the environment design is supporting the level design. Does that answer your question?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Excellent question there. Okay. Nadine, getting back to your question there. So a bit of a clarification there. What I mean is Link walks and jumps, and so does Mario. In what terms of ways can or should you be able to make a unique design for it? Okay. So, yes, Nadine, they both walk and jump, but I want you to think about the design from a higher level of abstraction there. So, for Mario, I love that I'm getting to use my whiteboard here. And actually, just a minute, I'm gonna change the view because I just realized you guys are still looking at a tiny view of me here. Give me a second. We're gonna stop this presentation. Where's my mouse cursor? Doo-doo-doo. Boo. Stop sharing. No. Uh-oh. There we go. Okay, I think this is all that Google Meet's going to give me for zooming in. Okay, so at least that's a little better. All right, so say for Mario, I've got my, let's say I've got my game screen here, and I have my level. We got a little pipe, and we got a pit. And we've got Mario here. So because Mario's movement is generally very heavily on a linear direction, Mario moves forwards and backwards really well, does not move up and down so well. So Mario's up and down movement isn't particularly, that's his jump. Moving Mario up and down on the game screen is a high skill action. So as a result, I want to put all my challenges for Mario very much about his vertical positioning. So the pipe, here we get a little lid there, so it looks more like a pipe. That pipe challenges me vertically. This pit challenges me vertically. This pit directly works with Mario's inability to control his up and down movement very carefully. You know, there's an entire, so Mario's constantly fighting against gravity. I have a button that negates the pull of gravity momentarily. Mario's jump. These challenges and level layout works directly with that jump and the fact that I've got a very strong horizontal movement control, very weak vertical movement control. So let's compare that to Zelda. Here, I'm going to move over here. Let's do another one here. Let's just label this Mario. Zelda. So for Zelda, we've got a little dungeon map here. Got a couple of doors. 3 doors, and we've got an enemy, and we've got Link here. So in Zelda, I've got very strong horizontal and vertical movement. So as a result, I've got really clear control of how I'm going to move around this play space. As a level designer, I now want to make this very much about me having obstacles that are directly antagonizing my ability to move. So a lot of the enemies in Zelda will directly move towards the player to frustrate my ability to move. A lot of the overall navigation isn't so much, so it's generally, if I want to be making this interesting, I will provide hard locks. A locked door here and a locked door here. Because that totally screws with my ability to move around the environment. I just can't get past this thing anymore. That harshly blocks me. Mario does not deal with a lot of locked doors because the interesting thing for Mario is the limitation on that vertical movement. In Zelda, because I've got such an overall powerful movement set, I can move across the entire domain of the screen. As a level designer, I have to make that interesting by either having enemies that are directly moving in towards me. They can also be doing this remotely with a projectile, in which case I've got to directly address them because there's not a lot of dodging I can do because they're able to pursue after me so aggressively. And then they also frustrate my ability to move with very harsh obstacles. So locked doors, pits, that kind of stuff. The tip of Mr. Freeman, locked areas. Yes. Okay, so Nadine, does that answer your question? So again, both of these, there's movement and jumping involved. Zelda, much less so than Mario, but the level design is very different because the fundamental view and hence the player movement tools are very different between the two. So actually, well, I'm waiting for Nadine's response there. This also completely changes if I'm doing a first-person game or a third-person game. The overall, even though I'm still moving and jumping, the level design to support that is very different. So, actually a really good example of this is how they approach this in Metroid Prime, and holy crap, a lot of Nintendo references. But Metroid Prime, first-person platforming done very, very well, and a very, very careful focus on level design there. Metroid Prime is mostly about its level design as opposed to its enemy design. A lot of the fights in Metroid Prime is just about, I lock onto something and start moving around it, and then I'm just trying to shoot and dodge a little bit there. It's very much about its environment, which is great because Metroid is absolutely about time and a place. And I'm very excited for Metroid Prime 4 coming out in December. All right, cool. Let's check in the chat. Do we have any other questions? Okay, good comment there from Bites to Fotoro. Say in Ori there are areas you can see but aren't reachable, power-ups and new abilities. Yes, this is actually another really useful thing. So that is lock then key design. That's how a lot of Metroidvanias work. It's I will see, oh man, I can't get to that ledge yet. I sure want that power-up that's on that ledge. Oh, I just got a double jump. I want to go back to that ledge. Now I can get the power-up. That double jump has now become super useful. It's also, it always becomes kind of maddening as a designer when you realize a lot of like Metroidvanias, all they're kind of doing is just like artificially limiting things. And then they're like, oh, well, what if you could just jump higher? And that suddenly becomes like super satisfying, and they're just tweaking a value and you've got this huge gameplay boost from that. Or like we have a door that reacts to blue shots and not red shots. Now you got the blue shot gun. Or this is a ceiling you can stick to. It's just you touch it and we just turn off gravity for you, and you need a special sticky ceiling interaction module with that. It's it's fantastic just how much of good Metroidvania design is just about establishing player limitations and then just slowly taking them away. And occasionally you give them new gameplay tools. But usually way I find that one of the most effective things is just to start removing those limitations for the player. All right, does anyone else have any further questions? All right, we're waiting. Okay, I think we're all good then. Is anyone in the chat? Waiting for chat? Just gonna give chat a few more seconds there. What about 3D games? Anxious. Anxious, could you detail that question a little bit more? I need to know more about what you're curious about regarding 3D games there. So I think, so Anxious, for 3D games, if I was to guess here a little bit, here I'm gonna, actually I can draw 3D games. Yeah, this will be a great place to draw them. Okay, so for a 3D game, we got our game screen there. Then let's say I've got my, look at me doing perspective. So I got my little perspective view. I've got a little door there. Let's say we've got a hallway that's going off. How do I do a hallway? Okay, that's a hallway. So it's very much the same kind of thing. So in a 3D game, I've effectively got, let's see. Oh, come on, focus up. There we go. Thank you very much. There we go. Thank you very much, webcam. So for a 3D game, the rules are very much the same, except for I've got a lot of control over how I'm handling the camera there and the overall perspective I've got onto the game field. So generally within a 3D game, I want to be providing a lot of visual clues about where I want to have the player looking and directing their camera because it's such an important mechanic. So I will have a flickering light here that is flickering on and off because I want the player looking in this direction. That flickering light reflects on this wall and on the ceiling and on the floor. The rules for a 3D game kind of level design is very similar to that of a 2D game's level design regarding understanding the player's perspective, their movement tool set, the gameplay tools, and working with a level that within a level layout that supports those. Okay. So important thing with 3D level design is just be aware that that your level design has to support the fact that the player has got a camera that they're moving around that's changing their perspective. Another important thing for 3D level design, remember it's not just the player, but the player and a camera. If it's first person, that helps a lot, but then you can't get a good view on the player spatially. If it's a third person, you've actually now got to have a level that supports the player and a giant camera that is floating 1 meter to 2 meters behind the player or whatever that distance is. So this is actually an area I see with a lot of third-person games is they forget the fact that you have to be able to have space for the player and their camera. When we're working on Max Payne 3, originally we wanted to have completely realistic dimensions for all the levels, and then we realized, oh wait, it's not just Max Payne that's moving around, it's Max Payne and this giant camera rig that he drags around with him, so we had to open up the levels a little bit more. That worked so much better, still felt realistic, even though if you sat there with a tape measure, it wasn't realistic. There are some giant friggin' doors in Max Payne 3, and the game is so much better as a result, because I tried it with those normal actual real world dimension doors, and it was terrible. Every single time you went through one of those normal real world doors, it was like a tiny little gameplay nightmare, and it sucked. All right. So Anxious, does that answer your question regarding 3D level design? Okay. Also, design tip, and this is, I think, this is going to be pushing against the grain, but I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. The cognitive load for players having to control both a player and a camera is really high. So remember that in your designs. You've got to give the player generally a chance. Like, if you're asking them to do both in harmony with each other, that can have a very good feeling gameplay experience, but it's also a gameplay experience that offers a lot of friction for most players. You will notice a massive increase in player retention when you start to separate those out. Really good example of this is what happened with Lego Star Wars, or the Lego game franchise, Lego Star Wars in particular. They've got really excellent design where you're moving a player around and the camera just takes care of itself. They then did, I think it was Lego Star Wars, the Skywalker Saga, and they're like, we're gonna make this more like a AAA game with a camera you control behind the player, and it's all intense and looks really cool and it's very exciting, and their player numbers just dropped right off. Because people are like, this is now, I'm trying to figure out all this stuff, and then I've also got this camera to worry about, and I certainly had other problems as well, but that's certainly, it used to be Lego Star Wars was a game you could just hand to your kids, they would play it, they could play it with their friends, play it with grandma, great. When you got that camera behind you as well, and you gotta do movement plus babysit a camera, that can just be too much for people. How to decide if the player controls the camera? If it's advantageous to the experience. Certainly, like, let me think about this. So, this is interesting because I think this is something we're still figuring out as an industry, is exactly what the balance of this is. It took us a long time to figure out 3D game design, and like some of those early PS1 games and N64 games are rough. Go back and play them now and you're like, man, we did not have this figured out at all. Gex 3D is not a great experience, in my opinion. But I think what we're finding now is how we solved the problem was we added in a lot of technical complexity, and we had a player base that was really engaged with that level of technical complexity. Now that we're finding that we've got to expand the overall number of people that are playing games, or we're trying to make this, a more and more inviting medium, we're finding that level of technical complexity is just, it's too much for most people, and it's frustrating them and pushing them away. So this is a tough one, because like something like Fortnite, they've actually got a really careful balance where generally as I'm moving around, I don't need to be babysitting the camera as much. It's either I'm moving around or I'm stationary and I'm shooting at something. It's rare that I want to be both moving and shooting at the same time. It's got gameplay that supports, I will move, the camera is now at a position that's good for movement. I'm now shooting at someone, I'm now focused more on aiming and less at movement. There's a really good give and take there, but it's rarely asking me to be both moving the camera and the player at the same time. You can do that, and that offers a higher skill ceiling, but if I'm a lower skilled player, I can still play the game if I just move my character somewhere, stop, aim and shoot, then I go back to movement. It's a tough balance, and it's one, like I said, one that we're still figuring out. Like a lot of my designs now, I'm trying to de-emphasize camera movement as much as possible. If we're doing a first-person game where we want a player very much looking around the environment, I'm like, okay, in that case, we slow down the pace of gameplay a huge amount, find our challenge within that overall balance, so that we can have players going in, and if they are bumping into walls and that kind of stuff and spinning around, we're not actively punishing them as they're trying to figure this stuff out. We're allowing them to go slow and easy, get acclimated to the experience, and we're just going to find the challenge somewhere else in the overall gameplay cycle. or gameplay loop. All right. Bytes, does that answer your question? And also, does anyone else have any other questions? We're just about at time here. Okay, I think we're all good. Does anyone have any final questions? Okay. All right, I think we're going to wrap it up there then. Thank you very much, everyone. This was a great class. Oh, Bytes might still be alive. Let's see. All right. So I was going to say this was, all right, so I'm just going to wait a little bit for Bytes. But overall, really fun class. Thank you very much, everyone. Let's see, are there any final comments from Bytes? I think we're just going to wrap it up there then. All right. Great class, everyone. I'll see you all next week. Take care. And of course, if you have any thoughts or feedback, mattf@freemandesign.institute. All right. Later, everyone.